I thought my daughter's wedding would be the happiest day of our lives. But when her fiancé humiliated me in front of everyone, smashing my face into the cake, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a rude young man, I was staring at the mask slipping off a monster. What happened in the minutes and days that followed changed everything. My name is Catherine, I am 55 years old, and I never imagined I would have to tell a story like this. For most of my life, I believed in family, in tradition, in the bonds that tie us together across years and hardships. I raised my daughter, Lily, with everything I had after my husband passed away when she was only 12. It was just the two of us for so long, and I poured all my love, all my hopes, all my sacrifices into her future. Every late night working at the library, every penny saved instead of spent, every tear I wiped from her cheek, it was all with the dream that one day, when she walked down the aisle, I would see her radiant, happy, beginning her own life with a man who would treasure her. That was what made the betrayal that unfolded so unbearable. I wasn't just humiliated as a guest or as a mother. I was humiliated as the woman who had given her entire soul to raising a daughter, only to be degraded by the man she was about to marry, in front of her, in front of my family, in front of an entire hall full of people. The morning of the wedding had begun with the kind of nervous excitement that every mother feels. I woke before dawn, unable to sleep. My small kitchen filled with the smell of coffee as I sat at the table, thinking of Lily as a little girl playing with her dolls, pretending to be a bride. She used to put on a sheet as a veil and ask me to clap for her as she walked across the room. Now, all these years later, it was real. She was in her 20s, successful in her job, and engaged to a man who, until that day, I had convinced myself might be good enough for her. His name was Ryan. He was tall, confident, with the kind of smile that could charm a room. But there was something about him that had always made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way his jokes sometimes carried a sharp edge, or how he always needed to be the center of attention. He treated Lily well in public, at least as far as I could see, but I had caught moments where his eyes hardened, or where his voice dropped in a tone that felt less like love and more like ownership. I pushed those doubts aside, telling myself that maybe I was just being protective. Maybe I was still clinging to my role as Lily's guardian when it was time to let go. The church was filled with flowers that morning. White roses and soft lilies, the scent so thick it made me dizzy. Guests arrived in their best clothes, the chatter of excitement rising like a tide. I wore a pale blue dress, one I had saved for months to afford, with a matching hat that I thought made me look elegant. When Lily walked down the aisle, radiant in her gown, tears filled my eyes. She was breathtaking, glowing, and in that moment all my doubts about Ryan slipped into the background. Surely, I told myself, no man would stand beside her on a day like this if he didn't truly love her. The ceremony was beautiful. Vows exchanged, rings slipped onto fingers, and the applause of guests filled the hall. For a few fleeting moments, I allowed myself to believe everything was going to be fine. I hugged Lily tightly afterward, whispering, "You're beautiful, my darling. Your father would be so proud." She smiled, her eyes shining, and said, "Thank you, Mom. I love you." That was all I needed in that instant, that affirmation that, no matter what, our bond was still strong. It wasn't until the reception that everything unraveled. The reception hall was grand, filled with twinkling lights and tables laden with food. Laughter and music spilled across the room. Speeches were given, toasts made, and the first dances were full of joy. I sat with relatives and old friends, my heart swelling with pride. This was supposed to be the culmination of years of sacrifice. I thought I could finally relax. Then came the cake. It was a towering masterpiece, for tiers of frosted perfection with delicate sugar flowers curling down the sides. Guests gathered around as Lily and Ryan prepared to cut it. Cameras flashed, laughter echoed, and everyone leaned in, waiting for the moment. I stood close, eager to see them feed each other the first slice. It was tradition, after all, a sweet ritual that symbolized partnership, sharing, tenderness. Lily cut a small piece, carefully placed it on a fork, and offered it to Ryan. He smiled, exaggeratedly chewing for the cameras, everyone clapping. Then it was his turn. He cut a piece, held it up toward Lily, and for a second I thought he was going to be playful. Maybe dab a little frosting on her nose like so many couples do, but then his eyes flicked to me, before I even understood what was happening. Ryan turned, took a handful of cake with his bare hand, and shoved it into my face. The room gasped. The laughter stopped. The sugary sweetness smashed across my nose, my cheeks, smearing my lipstick, staining my dress. I stumbled back, stunned, humiliated. Frosting dripped from my chin as silence fell over the hall. My heart pounded in my chest, my face burning hot. Ryan laughed. Laughed. He threw his head back and cackled as though it were the funniest joke in the world. "Lighten up, Catherine," he shouted, his voice booming through the microphone. "It's all in good fun." But it wasn't fun. It wasn't playful. It was cruel. I stood frozen, the weight of hundreds of eyes on me. My relatives, my friends, strangers, all staring, some horrified, some uncomfortable, some trying to laugh it off because they didn't know what else to do. Lily's face was pale, her mouth open in shock. For a second, I thought she was going to rush to me, to defend me, but Ryan wrapped an arm around her and whispered something in her ear. She hesitated, then forced a shaky smile, as though trying to smooth things over. The betrayal cut deeper than any cake ever could. I excused myself, my legs trembling as I hurried to the restroom. Inside, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Frosting smeared across my face, tears streaking down my cheeks, my carefully chosen dress ruined. I pressed my hands to the sink and tried to steady my breathing. This wasn't just a prank. This was Ryan showing his true self. He had taken the one day that was supposed to be filled with love and respect and used it to assert power, to degrade me, to send a message that I was beneath him. And the worst part? Lily had stood there and done nothing. I wiped my face as best I could, but the damage was done. The humiliation clung to me, seared into my memory. When I returned to the hall, people tried to pretend everything was normal. Music played again, guests danced, but I could feel the shift. Some avoided my eyes. Others whispered in corners. Ryan strutted about, triumphant, as though he had proven something. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My face still burned, my chest ached with shame. Over and over, I replayed the moment, the laughter, the frosting, the silence of the room. I felt betrayed by Ryan, yes, but also by Lily. My daughter, the girl I had raised with love and sacrifice, had chosen to stand by him instead of me. It was then that I realized this wasn't just about humiliation. It was about control. Ryan had shown me who he was. And if he could humiliate me like that on her wedding day, in front of everyone, what would he do to her in the privacy of their home? I knew then that I couldn't let this go. This wasn't just about me getting justice for my humiliation. It was about saving Lily from a man who had just revealed the cruelty lurking beneath his charming exterior. And so, that night, as the moonlight spilled across my bedroom floor, I made myself a promise. I would expose him. I would make sure everyone saw the truth. I would reclaim my dignity, and I would not rest until Ryan's mask was ripped off for good. I woke up the morning after the wedding with a sour taste in my mouth, though it wasn't from the champagne I had forced down to calm my nerves. It was from the humiliation still coating me like sticky frosting I couldn't wash away. The pillow beneath me was damp from tears I hadn't realized had leaked through the night. I stared at the ceiling, the pale morning light creeping across it, and felt the same hollow ache in my chest I had felt the moment Ryan's hand shoved that cake into my face. When I rose, the mirror across from my bed caught my reflection. My eyes were swollen, rimmed with red. The carefully styled hair I had worn for my daughter's wedding was now tangled and flat. And even though the makeup was gone, I still saw remnants of frosting in my imagination, like a phantom stain clinging to me. I leaned on the dresser, my fingers pressing so hard against the wood that they ached. It wasn't just the act itself that haunted me, it was the meaning behind it. I had raised Lily to know better. I had raised her to recognize cruelty. And yet she had stood by him, forced a smile, and carried on as though nothing had happened. The betrayal wasn't only Ryan's, it was hers. I brewed a pot of coffee in the kitchen, the gurgle and hiss filling the silence of the house. Each sip was bitter, but I welcomed it. I needed the bitterness. I needed the reminder that what had happened was real. For a few hours I sat at the table, replaying the scene again and again, but as the sun rose higher, something else began to bloom inside me. Anger. The humiliation had burned. Yes, but now it was turning into fire, steady and purposeful. If Ryan thought he could humiliate me into silence, he was wrong. If Lily thought I would quietly accept this man as her husband without questioning what he had just revealed, she was wrong. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't simply storm into their honeymoon suite and scream at them, though the temptation clawed at me. Ryan was clever, manipulative in a way that allowed him to hide behind charm. If I accused him without proof, he would twist the story, make me look dramatic, maybe even convince Lily I was jealous or overbearing. No, if I wanted justice, if I wanted to protect my daughter from the trap she had just walked into, I needed evidence. I needed to show the world exactly who he was. The first step was reaching out to people who might know more about him. Weddings always bring together family and friends you've never met. And I realized how little I knew about Ryan's world outside of Lily. He was always so polished when he came around me. So perfectly groomed in words and manners. But what about his past? What about the people who had known him before he was trying to impress a future mother-in-law? I began discreetly asking questions. I called my cousin Elaine, who had spoken to Ryan's college friend during the reception. She told me the friend had seemed oddly reserved when Ryan's name came up. Like he knew something but didn't want to say it, Elaine explained. That was my first thread. Then I remembered a woman I had briefly spoken with during the rehearsal dinner. A distant relative of Ryan's. She had let slip a comment that at the time I brushed off, but now it came back to me with clarity. He's always been the wild one, she had said, with a nervous chuckle. At the time, I thought she meant he was the life of the party. Now I wondered if she meant something else entirely. I dug deeper. I called Lily under the pretense of checking in, asking how the honeymoon was going. Her voice was cheerful, too cheerful, the way people sound when they're trying to convince themselves everything is fine. She told me Ryan was wonderful, attentive, so much fun. But in the background, I thought I heard his sharp tone, telling her to hurry up. She quickly ended the call, saying, "I'll talk to you soon, Mom, love you." Before hanging up, that tone chilled me. I knew it too well. It was the voice of control, the voice of someone who wanted to dominate, not love. The more I searched, the more I found small cracks in Ryan's mask. A neighbor who had grown up with him remembered his temper as a teenager. An old classmate recalled a bar fight he had started in college. A former girlfriend, who I reached through social media, confessed that Ryan had once thrown her phone against a wall because she didn't answer his call quickly enough. Each story was like a puzzle piece falling into place, and the image forming was clear. Ryan was dangerous, manipulative, cruel, but it wasn't enough to know it. I had to show it. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Ryan's arrogance was his greatest weakness, and he couldn't resist showing off. When Lily and Ryan returned from their honeymoon, they hosted a small dinner at their new apartment. I was invited, of course, though part of me wanted to refuse. But I knew this was my chance to observe, to see firsthand how he treated her in their own space. When I arrived, the apartment looked pristine, every cushion in place, every glass sparkling. But the tension in the air was thick. Lily greeted me warmly, hugging me tightly, but her eyes darted to Ryan as though seeking permission. He stood by the counter, drink in hand, smiling too broadly. Throughout the evening, I watched carefully. Ryan was attentive when others were watching, pulling out Lily's chair, pouring her wine. But when her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her fork, his eyes narrowed. When she spoke too long about her job, he cut her off with a joke that made the others laugh but made her shrink in her seat. It was subtle, but I saw it. I knew those signs later. When I excused myself to the restroom, I passed their bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, and inside I saw Lily's phone sitting on the nightstand. The screen cracked. My stomach sank. That was no accident. On my way home that night, I made a decision. It wasn't enough to gather whispers and half-truths. I needed undeniable proof, something that no amount of Ryan's charm could erase. If he humiliated me with cake in front of a crowd, then I would expose him in front of one too. I began keeping a journal, documenting everything I saw, everything I heard. I saved messages from Lily that hinted at tension. I reached out again to the ex-girlfriend, asking if she would be willing to put her experience in writing. She agreed, saying, "I've wanted to warn someone about him for years." I spoke to neighbors who had overheard arguments. Slowly, I built a file, thick with accounts of Ryan's cruelty. At the same time, I worked on Lily. Not with accusations, I knew she would defend him if I attacked too directly. Instead, I asked gentle questions. Are you happy, darling? Do you feel safe? Sometimes her eyes would cloud, her lips pressing together as though she wanted to say more but couldn't. Other times she would smile brightly and insist everything was fine. But the cracks were widening. I could see my plan crystallized when I learned they were hosting another gathering, a bigger one this time, a celebration for friends, family, colleagues. Perfect. That would be the stage. Just as Ryan had used a public moment to humiliate me, I would use a public moment to expose him. I reached out to a trusted friend, Rosa, who had been at the wedding and had seen my humiliation firsthand. She agreed to help me. Together, we planned. She would distract Ryan if needed, giving me the chance to present what I had gathered. It had to be dramatic, undeniable, but also measured. I didn't want to be seen as a bitter mother-in-law. I wanted to be seen as the truth teller. The night of the party arrived, and I walked into their apartment with my heart pounding but my head high. I carried my bag, heavy with the file of evidence I had compiled. Guests milled around, laughter filling the air, music playing. Ryan greeted me with exaggerated warmth, kissing my cheek as though nothing had ever happened. Catherine. So glad you could make it, he said, his voice dripping with false charm. I smiled back, but inside, I was steel. As the night wore on, Ryan grew more boisterous, his laughter louder, his jokes sharper. Lily floated around, serving drinks, her smile brittle. I watched her carefully, waiting for the moment. And then it came. Ryan, emboldened by the attention, began telling the story of the wedding cake. He laughed as he recounted it, embellishing details, mocking me as the crowd chuckled awkwardly. My face burned, but this time it wasn't with shame. It was with determination. I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the noise. Yes, Ryan, why don't you tell them the whole story? Or should I? The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Ryan smirked, trying to brush it off. Oh come on, Catherine, it was just a joke, but I didn't let him finish. I reached into my bag and pulled out the file. One by one, I laid out the evidence, the written account from his ex-girlfriend, the testimonies from neighbors, the photo of Lily's cracked phone, the notes I had kept of his cruel remarks. Gasps rippled through the room as I spoke clearly, firmly, recounting each piece of evidence. This man isn't just a jokester, I said, my voice steady. He is cruel. He humiliates, he controls, and he hides behind a smile. He thinks he can treat women, his wife, his family, as props for his games. But the truth always comes out. Ryan's face drained of color. He sputtered, tried to laugh it off, but no one laughed with him this time. Lily stood frozen, her eyes wide, tears spilling down her cheeks. The room was filled with whispers, shock, condemnation, and in that moment, I knew, the revenge had begun. The silence after I finished speaking stretched long and heavy, as though the air itself had thickened in that room. People stared at me, some with wide eyes of disbelief, others nodding slowly as if puzzle pieces in their own minds were beginning to connect. Ryan's smile twitched, faltered, then plastered itself back in place like a cheap mask. He chuckled nervously, raising his glass. Really, Catherine? This is your moment? At my party? Are you trying to ruin my reputation with some old stories? But no one laughed. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some whispering to one another, others exchanging glances that carried unspoken questions. I saw Lily standing near the kitchen doorway, her face pale, lips trembling, eyes darting between me and Ryan. For a split second, I thought she might defend him, her loyalty, her fear, her confusion all mixing in her tear-filled eyes. But she said nothing. She stayed frozen, caught between us like a child watching her parents fight. That was when Rosa stepped in. They aren't just old stories, she said, her voice steady but sharp. She had her phone in her hand, ready. I was there at the wedding. I saw what Ryan did to Catherine, and it wasn't funny. It wasn't harmless. It was humiliating, and the way he laughed afterward said everything. The guests gasped. Rosa pulled up a video she had taken at the wedding, one I hadn't even known she had. On the small screen, everyone could see Ryan grabbing the cake, smashing it into my face, and then standing there with that cruel, triumphant grin. You could hear the awkward silence, the scattered gasps, the forced laughter. The proof was undeniable. Ryan lunged forward, trying to snatch the phone from Rose's hand, but two of my nephews stepped between them, holding him back. His mask cracked completely then. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice losing its smoothness and turning sharp, harsh, like broken glass. "You all think you know me? You don't know anything. Catherine's just bitter because she's old and alone. She can't stand to see Lily happy without her." The words hit me like knives, but I stood tall. I refused to flinch. "This isn't about me being alone, Ryan. This is about Lily. About how you treat her when no one's looking. About the woman whose phone screen is cracked because of you. About the ex-girlfriend who wrote this statement begging someone to finally listen. About the neighbors who heard the screaming through the walls." My voice grew louder, firmer. "This isn't bitterness. This is truth." The room erupted in murmurs. Some guests walked out in disgust, shaking their heads. Others confronted Ryan directly, asking if what I said was true. His face turned red, his fists clenched, and for a moment I saw the dangerous man lurking behind all the charm. He took a step toward me, his arm twitching as though he might actually lash out, but then something happened I didn't expect. Lily stepped forward. "Stop," she whispered, her voice trembling but audible enough to silence the room. Her hands shook as she reached up to wipe tears from her face. "Stop, Ryan." He turned to her, his voice suddenly sweet, coaxing. "Baby, don't listen to this. She's trying to poison you against me. She's jealous, can't you see?" But Lily shook her head. Her tears streamed harder now, but her eyes had changed. They were no longer wide with fear. They were narrowing with realization. "No," she said softly. "I've seen it too. The way you look at me when I do something wrong. The way you raise your voice, the way you grab things out of my hands, the way you make me feel so small sometimes." She took a shuddering breath. "I thought it was just me. I thought I was imagining it. But if Mom found proof?" Ryan's face twisted. "Lily, don't, no." Her voice cracked but grew louder. "Don't you dare tell me what to think anymore." The room fell silent again, and this time Ryan was the one left frozen. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked around desperately, but the crowd no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with suspicion, even disgust. His empire of charm was collapsing brick by brick, right in front of him. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. A stunned quiet settled, broken only by Lily's sobs. I rushed to her, wrapping my arms around her trembling body, holding her the way I had when she was a child afraid of thunder. She clung to me, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have listened. I should have seen." "It's not your fault," I told her, my own voice breaking. "He's good at hiding who he really is. But now you know. And now, we fight this together." That night marked the beginning of the unraveling. Over the next days, word spread quickly among family and friends. The story of Ryan's outburst, the evidence I had shared, the way Lily herself had spoken up, it became impossible to ignore. Ryan tried to spin the story, claiming I was manipulative, that I had planned to ruin his reputation out of spite. But the more he spoke, the more desperate he sounded. And the people who had seen his true face at that party weren't convinced. I began to help Lily prepare herself for what came next. Divorce. It was a word that weighed heavily on her tongue. One she had never imagined would apply to her so soon after her vows. But she realized quickly that staying with him would only end in pain. I sat with her at the lawyer's office, my hand over hers as she signed the initial paperwork. Her tears were quiet but steady. "It feels like I'm giving up," she whispered. "You're not giving up," I told her. "You're saving yourself. You're giving yourself a chance to be free, to be loved the way you deserve." In the weeks that followed, Ryan's mask fell apart entirely. He showed up at Lily's workplace one afternoon, shouting in the parking lot, calling her names that made strangers stop and stare. Security had to escort him away. Another time, he tried to come to my house, pounding on the door, screaming that I had ruined his life. I called the police, and he was forced to leave, but but not before yelling that I hadn't seen the last of him. Those were frightening moments, yes, but they only strengthened Lily's resolve. Each outburst proved what I had said, and each one was documented carefully by the lawyer. Bit by bit, the case against him grew ironclad, and through it all, something remarkable happened. Lily began to change. The timid smiles, the hesitant steps, they slowly gave way to confidence. She started laughing again, genuinely laughing, the way she hadn't in months. She began visiting me more, cooking in my kitchen like she used to, talking about her dreams again. "I want to go back to school," she told me one night, her eyes bright. "I want to finish my degree." My heart swelled with pride. "You should," I said. "Don't let anyone ever dim that light in you again." The final blow came during the court hearing. Ryan strutted in with a new lawyer, trying to look composed, but his arrogance betrayed him. He smirked at me across the courtroom, as though daring me to break. But when the judge read out the testimonies, the statements, the video, and Lily's own words about his treatment, the smirk vanished. The judge granted Lily the divorce swiftly, with protections in place against Ryan contacting her. His reputation, once polished and admired, lay in ruins. Colleagues distanced themselves. Friends stopped returning his calls. He had tried to destroy my dignity with a handful of cake, but in the end, it was his mask that crumbled in front of everyone. When it was over, Lily hugged me tightly outside the courthouse, her voice shaking. "Thank you, Mom. If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be." I held her face in my hands, brushing her tears away. "You'd still be strong," I said. "Because you are my daughter. But I'm glad I could help you see it sooner." That night, we sat at my dining table, the same place where I had cried into my coffee weeks earlier. But this time, there was no bitterness. There was warmth, laughter, and hope. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into something else, resilience, and as I looked at Lily, smiling through her tears, I realized something profound. My revenge wasn't just about humiliating Ryan the way he humiliated me. It was about reclaiming my dignity, yes, but more than that, it was about saving my daughter, giving her back the future she deserved. Justice had been served, not with fists or fury, but with truth, persistence, and love. Still, deep inside, I knew Ryan wasn't gone completely. Men like him rarely vanished quietly. But if he ever tried to rise again, he would find me standing in his way, not as the humiliated mother-in-law he mocked, but as the woman who had exposed him for what he truly was. In the weeks after the court hearing, life began to shift in ways that felt both strange and healing. For so long, Ryan had loomed over everything, his arrogance, his cruelty, the shadow he cast on Lily's happiness. Now that the legal ties were cut, it was like a fog had lifted. Yet freedom never feels instant. It comes slowly, like light filtering through blinds in the morning, each beam stronger than the last. I remember one morning vividly. I was in my kitchen, frying eggs, when Lily walked in wearing one of her old college sweatshirts. Her hair was in a messy bun, her eyes puffy from sleep, but her smile was the brightest I had seen in months. She sat at the table, poured herself some coffee, and said simply, "I feel like I can breathe again." Those words nearly broke me. I had spent so many nights worrying that she might never escape the grip of a man like Ryan. And now, to see her rediscover herself, it was worth every ounce of pain I had endured. Still, I wasn't naive. Men like Ryan rarely went away quietly. He didn't show up at our doors anymore, the restraining order saw to that, but his presence lingered in whispers. Friends told me he was bitter, that he ranted about us in bars, that he claimed he had been set up by a manipulative mother-in-law who couldn't let go of her daughter. But I knew the truth, his mask was shattered, and he was grasping at pieces too sharp to hold. One evening, Lily and I sat together with Rosa in my living room, a bottle of wine open on the table. Rosa had been my rock through everything, documenting, supporting, reminding me I wasn't crazy when humiliation had almost convinced me otherwise. We toasted to survival, to truth, to starting over. "He thought smashing cake in your face was power," Rosa said with a laugh that carried no joy. "But it was the beginning of his undoing. You gave him the rope, and he tied his own noose." Lily sighed, swirling her glass. "I still can't believe I didn't see it sooner. I thought love meant overlooking flaws, being patient." But Mom, you showed me that real love isn't about fear or humiliation. It's about respect. She looked at me with shining eyes. I'll never forget that. I squeezed her hand. That's all I ever wanted, Lily. For you to know your worth. But closure wasn't only about words. It was about reclaiming spaces that had been tainted. That wedding hall, the place where my humiliation had been broadcast for everyone to see, lingered like a wound in my memory. For weeks, I avoided even thinking about it. Then one day, Lily surprised me. Mom, she said, the hall reached out. They wanted to offer an apology. They said they should have stepped in when Ryan did what he did. They're inviting us to an event. A charity dinner. My first instinct was to say no. Why would I ever set foot in that place again? But then I thought about it differently. That hall wasn't cursed because of Ryan. It was just a place. He was the one who had turned it into a scene of cruelty. If I avoided it forever, then he would still have power over me. So I agreed. The night of the charity dinner, I dressed carefully. I wore a navy blue dress, simple but elegant, with a string of pearls around my neck. Lily came with me, radiant in a soft lavender gown. When we entered the hall, I felt my chest tighten for a moment, memories flashing, the feel of frosting against my skin, the sound of cruel laughter. But then I stood straighter. This time was different. We mingled, we laughed, we gave to charity. People came up to me, not with pity, but with respect. They told me I was brave, that I had inspired them, that my story had made them rethink the way they looked at relationships. Some even confided their own stories of humiliation and control, stories they had been too afraid to speak before. I realized then that my fight hadn't just been for me or for Lily. It was for countless others who had endured cruelty in silence. And Ryan? He was nowhere to be seen. I later heard he had been fired from his job after word of his outburst spread to his employers. He tried to freelance, but no one wanted to work with him. He drifted from town to town, his once polished reputation nothing but ash. The man who had thought himself untouchable was now just another bitter face fading into obscurity. But revenge isn't only about watching someone else fall. It's about rebuilding what they tried to destroy. For me, that meant repairing the bond between Lily and me. For months after the divorce, she would apologize, sometimes in tears, for not defending me that night, for smiling when Ryan had humiliated me. One night, I took her face in my hands and said, "Stop carrying guilt that isn't yours. He manipulated you. That's what men like him do. What matters is that you saw the truth and had the courage to walk away." She nodded, but I knew guilt doesn't vanish with one conversation. It takes time. Healing always does. To help her heal, I encouraged her to chase her dreams again. She enrolled in evening classes, determined to finish her degree. I went with her on the first day, waiting in the car until she came back out with a stack of books and a grin that lit up the night. "I feel alive again, Mom," she said, hugging me. "Thank you for never giving up on me." There were nights we stayed up late, her telling me about assignments, me cooking us late dinners, the two of us laughing like we hadn't in years. Slowly, we stitched our lives back together, stronger at the seams than they had ever been before. And me? I found strength I didn't know I had. For so long, I had seen myself as just a mother, just a widow, just a woman past her prime. But standing up to Ryan had reminded me that I was more. I was Catherine, a woman with fire in her veins, with dignity that no cake or cruelty could erase. Months later, I was invited to speak at a local women's group about my experience. I was nervous, but I agreed. Standing at that podium, I looked out at dozens of faces, women of all ages, some with eyes that carried stories they had never told. I spoke openly about humiliation, about betrayal, about the courage it takes to fight back when someone tries to strip you of your dignity. And when I finished, the applause was thunderous. Women came up to me afterward, thanking me, telling me I had given them hope. That night, as I drove home, tears filled my eyes. Not tears of pain this time, but of pride. The day Ryan shoved my face into that cake, I thought my dignity had been stolen forever. But here I was, standing taller than ever, not just reclaiming my own dignity but inspiring others to reclaim theirs. The story didn't end with Ryan's downfall. It ended with Lily's freedom. It ended with me rediscovering my strength. It ended with the bond between mother and daughter stronger than it had ever been, and though I will never forget that moment of humiliation, I don't carry it as a wound anymore. I carry it as a scar, a reminder that I survived, that I fought back, that I turned betrayal into justice. So when people ask me if I regret what I did, if I regret exposing Ryan so publicly, I smile and say, no. Because sometimes the only way to silence cruelty is to drag it into the light. And I know, deep in my heart, that no matter what lies ahead, Lily and I will face it together, not as victims, but as survivors.